Straight up, one of my favorite fights on this card. We have the Lone Wolf Mike Trizano, former Ultimate Fighter winner, taking on one of the hottest prospects you never hear about in Mr. Highlight, Ludovit Klein, Amat, Peter Bondra, Zdeno Chara, Marian Hossa, Marian Gabrick, all Slovakian athletes, all hockey players that I could think of, but Ludovit Klein making those big impacts in the UFC. He came in last summer on short notice, took on a really tough out in City Kickboxing's Shane Yong, and finished him in the first round with a combination from hell. It was a head kick. He swooped in there up against the cage, knocked him out cold. Now, that's the good. The bad, he came in on short notice. He missed weight. Weighed in at 150 for that fight at 145. Listen, can't make the weight, don't take the fight. But he did look really good in that fight. So Klein's coming in, and he was rumored to take a couple of fights, maybe sort of kind of at the end of last year, coming into early this year. For Mike Trizano, kind of in the same boat, because we haven't seen him in the octagon in the longest time. When he fought Grant Dawson, that was almost 2 years ago.
I'm going to be honest. I thought he got cut. And that's just, I'm going to be honest, like, he was gone for so long, and it wasn't like he was, like, the biggest prospect ever. He wasn't getting the Macy Barber push, and I'll let you continue, but honestly, I thought Mike Trizano had got cut from the UFC. I thought they had just let him go, because it makes no sense. You have a prospect who, yeah, they lose their first fight, but MMA is one of the few sports where you either win, and then you lose, or you learn from that loss, and then you get better because of it. So, it was just really weird that you didn't see him fight for almost 2 years, and then now he's finally making the return.
So you look at it, he beats Joe Giannetti on The Ultimate Fighter. That was season 27. He wins the season. Now, that was a weird one because, again, Luis Pena broke his foot, couldn't fight in the finale. So then they give Mike Trizano Luis Pena, and he beats Luis Pena, albeit by split decision. It was a classic striker versus striker who wants to grapple in Trizano, and Trizano just able to kind of impose his pressure, impose his will, get the win. You go back and watch the fight. It was really close. And then for Trizano, his next time out, he fights Grant Dawson, a guy who had weight issues, 145. And Dawson blew the doors off him. Now, for Trizano, he had a long layoff, and he was supposed to fight earlier on this year. And I say early on, we're already in May, early May. He's supposed to fight Rafael Alves, and he had to pull out of that fight, citing an injury. You go back, I listened to an interview with James Lynch not that long ago, All Access MMA, and he said that, he heard it pretty bad. So you hate to see that ankle injury. He wasn't able to train for a little bit, got back in the gym, got ready to go. And for Trizano, it's not like he comes out of the biggest gym. Oh, wait. He comes out of one of those underground gyms that you never hear about. It's Tiger Schulman. So in his corner, and this is one of those things that he talked about, and I had to write it down, he's going to have Ron Schulman. He's been working out with some really good fighters. Shane Burgos, Julio Arce, some really top-notch guys. Jimmy Rivera as well at that gym. You never hear about Schulman's. And for Mike Trizano, really, really good with the kickboxing.
He is, but it's weird because in a lot of his fights, he kind of is the reverse of whatever his opponent does. He is one of those fighters who, when I think of Mike Trizano, I kind of think of an earlier ally, Quinto, where it's, okay, I'm a good enough striker to where if you're a wrestler, I can defend your takedowns and force you to become a striker. But if you're a primary striker, then I can reach into my back pocket and I can use my offensive wrestling. And it's kind of what we saw in the Luis Pena fight. He was in there with a guy who was the more rangy striker who could throw a much higher variety, and then Trizano resorted to using his wrestling. So for this fight, it will be interesting because I do think if you want a comp for this fight, this is a very low level of what Henry Cejudo versus Merlin Moraes was. Because in Klein, you do have the more dynamic kicker. You have the guy who's not only dangerous at very long range, but he's also dangerous up close and on the mat. The only difference is, I think Mike Trizano can take down Ludovit Klein and not have to worry about getting submitted immediately. It's not like Mike Trizano is some scrub on the mat where he's immediately going to get the takedown, then I'm going to be worried about him getting triangled by Klein off of his back. I do think Trizano is going to have to make this an MMA fight because we talk about his Muay Thai background. He trains with Tiger Schulman's. It's weird because his stand-up game is quite basic. He's not one of those fighters who's going to go out there and really wow you with a lot of his strikes. He's effective in what he does, don't get me wrong. And I do think he's going to have to use his striking kind of as a smothering style against Klein. Like I had said, Klein's really good at close-up. He's got great elbows and knees. He's good on the mat, of course, with his jiu-jitsu. He's good at long range. But if Trizano can make this more of a boxing fight to where he's the one trying to kick out the legs of Klein with that long stance. He's the one trying to box up Klein on the inside. I actually think Mike Trizano could have a lot of success in this fight, and it's weird because Trizano, I think, is one of these guys who we've been talking about a lot more if he was able to use these last 2 years a little bit more effectively. Beating Luis Pena, who's still in the UFC and getting fights, does mean something, and the fact that Trizano was able to beat him so early and so young in his UFC career, and yes, I understand it was young in both guys' careers, but still, for Trizano to beat a guy like Pena and then us not really be able to see him after losing to Grant Dawson of all people, a really, really good fighter, it just really is a shame that we haven't been able to see Trizano grow in front of us in the cage for the last 2 years.
Well, the funny thing with that Trizano fight, so he fights Pena, and that was, again, like the makeup date for the Ultimate Fighter. He gets the win. Okay, I get to keep the strap. Do you know what card that was on? Let's have fun.
I watched it. I don't remember off the top of my head.
That was on the UFC Denver card where you had Yair Rodriguez taking on the Korean Zombie in the main event. But you also had Cowboy Cerrone being birthed by Mike Perry. That was that card where they had the throwback graphics. It was the 25th anniversary. That's how long ago this was. Like, we're getting close to what? That was over 2 years ago, bridging on through 2 years, 5 months ago. So it was a long time. For Ludovit Klein, the interesting thing was, going into his UFC debut, I had him pegged as a kickboxer. Now, if you're a boxer in MMA, you're not like James Toney was years ago taking on Randy Couture, where you have one skill and it's boxing. I'm Art Jimerson. I'm going to try and grab you and punch you. But Klein was billed as a boxer by Bruce Buffer. Now, you don't always put a lot of stock into how those fighters are billed. Maybe it's Wushu Sanda. Maybe it's Kung Fu with Roy Nelson.
Jitsu.
But they had boxing for Ludovit Klein. The guy does have really good boxing, but he's a very well-rounded fighter. He's trained some out of Sanford MMA. He's definitely the much more flashy striker out of these two guys, but he does have technique, has really good cardio, has decent jiu-jitsu. He's not the best off his back. He doesn't have the best takedown defense, but he has all of those tools out there. So when I looked at the odds for this one, they might be a little rich for my blood. I mean, Klein opened to minus 150. He's a rough minus 251 favorite on best fight odds. For Trizano, he opened to plus 130 at about a plus 200. If we have a look at Tapology to see what the fans are thinking, 889 total votes, 90% Klein, 77% by knockout. Well, Mike Trizano's never lost by knockout as a pro, I can tell you that, because he has one loss, is by submission to Grant Dawson. Is Ludovit Klein going to go out there and knock this guy out?
I think he can. I do. Now, again, it's hard to say something's going to happen that's never happened before, but something's never happened until it does happen, if that makes any sense. So I do think Ludovit Klein does have the striking acumen to at least hurt Mike Trizano. Will I say he's going to put him out? I've seen Trizano eat some pretty big shots, and he hasn't gone out from them. The only problem with Trizano is, here's the thing. He does have good offensive wrestling, but go back to that Grant Dawson fight. And I understand, Grant Dawson's like one of the higher level ground and pound guys and really wrestlers.
Leonardo Santos would say that.
Exactly, but he did just destroy Trizano on the ground. Like, it wasn't competitive at all once it did hit the mat, so it does worry me. Trizano will probably be the better grappler in this fight, especially if he does get top position, but it does concern me a little bit. If Trizano does win this fight and tries to use that style where, okay, I'm a good enough striker to get me by, and I'm a good enough wrestler to get me by, I do think he's going to have some tough matchups moving forward. All that being said, I like Ludovit Klein in this fight. I think what we saw against Shane Young was just a little glimpse of what his overall skill set really is, and I do think the UFC has a very exciting prospect on their hands with Klein. And here's the wild thing too. Most of the time when Mike Trizano is going to be in the cage, at 29 years, I know he's not on the younger side of a prospect, but normally he would be the prospect in this fight. He's the older guy by 3 years, so that just tells you what kind of a prospect you're dealing with Klein.
There's two fighters coming up here in the near future that I was excited about last year. Ludovit Klein's one of them, and Denis Bondar out of Ukraine. Those are the two guys that I'm really eager to see. I know Bondar has a fight booked shortly. This is the Klein fight. I have Klein to get the win, but it is a tricky fight. Like, the opening odds make a lot of sense to me. They're going further in the favor of Klein. Let me know down below who you've got in the comments section. But again, I do like the in and out of Klein. I like the side-to-side movement. If he's got to get kind of slick and wit it with his jiu-jitsu, maybe he can. I like the Sanford connection. Sanford MMA, Tiger Shulman's interesting matchup. The last time we saw that, well, it's been a little bit, but I love this fight. It should be a great one. Both of us going with Ludovit Klein to get the win. Slovakia represent. We got a great card coming up. You're not going to want to miss the rest of the prediction videos. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it.